So thank you all for being here. As I think most of you know, my name is Dave Elding. I am the interim executive director here at San Francisco Camera Work. And I think many people here are coming in from the Bay Area. I know Rachel is joining us from cold Champaign-Urbana. So even though we're a Bay Area organization, it is incredibly awesome, and we always acknowledge this, that we can be together from all over the place in this digital forum as much as we are eager to get back into the gallery. Um, but even though we're gathering digitally, the work of San Francisco Camera Work happens here in the Bay Area, which is the native lands of the Ohlone Ramaytush people. So we like to acknowledge that as we begin our program tonight. Today, Rachel Fein-Smolinski, our friend and Juror's Choice Award winner of our Forecast digital exhibit, which is still up today, we had a wonderful presentation. What was it, Rachel, Christina, like a month ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, what is time?
It was a little while. Time has, yeah, it's weird, but we had a bit of a technical glitch, and I think about half the people who wanted to come, weren't able to get in, and so we thought, well, we'll just do one more, and I think we knew it might be a little intimate, but I think it's better that way. I'm excited to be here on this rapidly approaching holiday and New Year's with all of you. Thank you for joining us here at San Francisco Camera Work. And with that, Rachel, I think I'll hand it off to you. Share with us as much as you'd like. And then I think when you're ready with this group, um, we can pause for questions, or we can maybe just turn this into more of a conversation. I think however you would like this to flow.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. Thank you, David and Christina. I'm very happy to be back to continue to talk at my screen, but also at real people. So yeah, as David said, I'm in Champaign-Urbana, which is on the native lands of the Peoria, Kickapoo, Miami, and Sioux tribes. So that's where I'm physically at. I have previously been, so I am going to be showing work that is kind of a continuation of work that I showed at my previous talk. I just to contextualize myself before I share the screen, I am an interdisciplinary artist. I have my main degree, I have an MFA in photography from Syracuse University and a BFA from San Francisco Art Institute, but I haven't physically been back in San Francisco in, I think, like 8 years. So it's good to be virtually back. So last talk, I spoke a lot about my work. I'll hit up the share screen right now. I'm gonna make the noise that people make when they share screen. Ba, ba, ba. So I shared work, and I'm gonna put the videos here and the chat in front of me. So anybody feel free to type in like thoughts or questions in the chat, or unmute yourself and ask a question as I'm speaking. Can everybody see a screen that has like a couple video things up? Awesome, sweet. So now I'm just gonna start a little PowerPoint. And play presenter view. Okay. So you all should be able to see a PowerPoint that superseded what was there, correct? Yes, sweet. So yeah, last time I spoke about my work and my practice mainly with archives. So I make installations that are very photo-based. I have been talking about myself as someone who I make work about photography, and I am deeply invested in like how image making has operated historically with a focus in pain representation and bodily representation. So the work that I showed last time and that I'll show pieces of this time was from, or is from, this continued body of work called Sex Lives of Animals Without Backbones. So Sex Lives of Animals Without Backbones is this textbook, or the title is from a textbook that I found during my last year of graduate school. I went into graduate school when I was 21, and I was a very different type of artist then. I was a very like straight street photographer, photographed my family. But I was also really, I have a chronic illness. I was in an accident when I was a child, so I have a back injury that has progressively gotten worse. So I've consistently been in constant pain. And I have also been like a hyper overachiever. So with this talk, I'm going to jump around, and I decided to do this a little bit more thematically. So last time, and there's a video up on the page and on YouTube now, which I'm so happy that's up actually. At first I was like, oh no, there's documentation of the words that came out of my mouth. But then I rewatched it to make sure I wasn't too reiterative today. And I was like, I didn't hate that. That's the first time in a while. So it's nice to not hate the sound of your own voice. So today I want to focus more on like a couple conceptual threads and some influences of my work, and I'm going to show more of my video work. So starting out, this is an image that I made recently. I use a lot of different image making techniques. So this is a cyanotype on top of this piece of correspondence. I don't know if anybody else here may have gotten this when I received my paltry $1,200 like a million years ago. And this cyanotype is from a lantern slide print from an archive that I've been working with at SUNY Upstate Medical University. So I do focus a lot on like intersections of metaphor, language, and then lived experience and how that affects subjectivity. My work is quite a bit about like interrogating the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, or deconstructing the notion of scientific objectivity. So the threads that I'm thinking about now are going to be kind of defense against like the flatness of an image. And I think this has been especially or acutely felt by a lot of people because virtual communication is like the mode that most people have. I just moved from Syracuse, New York to Urbana, Illinois, and for a full-time teaching job, and I don't know anybody. I am high risk. I haven't been physically touched by another human being who isn't a doctor since February. So I have been thinking a lot about three-dimensionality and binocular disparity, or like the sort of tragedy that we're never going to be able to access the flat image that a photograph gives us. Photographs are really enigmatic because it gives us this fantasy that we never have access to in real life. And so I'm going to go through and show some of the work that I've made that kind of dances around the front and the back of something. And then the other thread that I wanted to focus on is pleasure. My work is so much about pain, but it's also very deeply about visual pleasure. So this is an image that is, the central image is a photograph from SUNY Upstate Medical University's archives, and this is from 1962. And so I use a mixture of appropriated images from clinical photographic collections and images that I've made of objects in the collections, and then these sort of DIY things that I've been doing. And the things that I'm going to focus a little bit more on today are the materials that I use. So this is a piece that is in the show and that I talked a bit about last time. But this is The central image is a clinical photograph, but it's printed on ceramic tiles and then grouted on these grids that I've painted from sourcing colors from suggestions for like hospital colors of the year, and coated in resin. So all of the materials that I use, I'm sourcing from the field that I'm working with, which is definitely like techno-scientific. I started doing this work because I was intimidated by it. I'm intimidated by the hard sciences, and the dichotomy of hard versus soft sciences is something that it is this construct that also is a sister history with the history of image making or photography. And the history of photography isn't as much about like technological advancement as it is about state sanctioned reproduction of imagery and access to that technology. But what I've been thinking about is access to imagery of your internal organs, and how limited that is. Like how I thought about this yesterday during the Double Planet, where everybody was like, oh, we have to see this. I forgot what was it called? The Great Concurrence. I feel ridiculous that I don't know what the official name of it was. The Great what was it?
Conjunction is
what, like, okay, the conjunction. I've been like the Great Convergence. But I didn't have like an intent. I was like, oh, I need to see this. And then it was cloudy and I fucked up and I didn't go outside at all and I just didn't see it. But it felt like no great tragedy. And I was like, why do I feel that way? But that also made me think about the fact that like the only knowledge that most people who are not astronauts have of space is through images. The only proof that we have that I guess Jupiter looks like the way that it looks is through images and reproductions. And so I was thinking about how much that applies to physical bodies too, and how I will never be able to see my own heart. I could theoretically see it through a form of imaging, but even that, most people don't have access to images of their internal body unless there's something wrong. And even then, their access is very limited. And so your knowledge of yourself is through fantasy and through projection and analogy onto like somebody else's image. So these are things that I think about a lot with my work. So interspersed in this slideshow, I added a bunch of stuff that's from like my longer slideshow that I didn't show last time. And a big thing of that is going to be influence. So as I said, I kind of wanted to focus on pleasure. Has anyone read Pleasure Activism or like anything by Adrienne Marie Brown? It's a fairly recent text. She's a really, really wonderful author who also writes sort of speculative fiction. So I put these two texts side by side because they're both very recent and very influential right now, and sort of models of how I view myself as an artist. I view myself, and this goes back to my feelings and experience in grad school, where I was like, I gotta make like brilliant street photos. I specifically went to Syracuse University to work with someone who was making work that I thought I should make work like white cis male. And it turns out that's not who I was. And the things that I started going towards the things that gave me like private pleasure, and one of them is science fiction. And so in pleasure activism, Adrienne Marie Brown talks it's rooted in a lot about speculation, but also about like how much activism should be rooted in pleasure and the right to experiencing pleasure, especially for like subjugated groups. And then Octavia's Brood is a recent collection. I think it was published in 2019. I have notes here. Of speculative fiction or sci-fi stories that are related to social justice. And I would argue that like most science fiction or speculative fiction has a social justice application. So this has informed the way that I make work, where I think of myself as a science fiction author, but with visual material. So it has informed the way I go into archives and work as a researcher in these spaces that are normally, researchers are usually given access to special collections to look but not reproduce most of the visual imagery. So this is an image from a show that I had at the Griffin Museum of Photography in 2018. And so another like construct of the way that I make work is that I'm giving myself an at-home medical degree. And I started really doing this after looking at a lot of and spending time with these rogue DIY science hackers when I briefly lived in Berlin. There was like an intense community of them, and I became very interested in this group of people who were like, we want to reproduce knowledge outside of institutional access. So this is going back to the material choices that I make are based upon the field that I'm working with. So I started mounting images by giving them stitches, and the sizes of these prints dictated how many stitches that they got. And then, so more of the things that I'm sharing in this, I'm going to jump around in time, but kind of connect these via threads, literal and figurative. This is an image from like I think it was like a month or so ago. I have some studio shots of things I'm working on. So in keeping with the sci-fi exploration, I use the mythology of animation and or resurrection a lot. So I really like playing with materials in a way that animates these flat images. So going towards the defense against the flat image and the frustration of like the lack of behind, the no back of looking at an image. I think that's something that I grapple with a lot. We're in my studio now, so just for like material context, this is just a recent print on cotton sateen. So I print on fabric, and this is like me continuously exploring the metaphor of soft and hard. So soft sciences and soft having also a lot of associations with passivity and femininity, and then hard sciences. So I play with hard and soft materials. So the prints on ceramic tiles and then contrasting them with these porous materials that I've been printing on that more reference like hospital sheets. And then this is an image from an installation that I talked about during part one that was at SUNY Upstate Medical University Health Sciences Library. So the medical library where I sourced archival material, I had a show at, and these are hung with suture threads. So they're held up on these grids via tension with the suture thread. So actually the middle print is what's here. I just got these back from New York. So my role as an artist and a researcher has become, it's become hard for me to define, because I come into these spaces where there are, generally I reach out to doctors, scientists, archivists to get into these spaces and say, I'm doing research, and then creating these installations and videos that are meditations upon what it means to be in pain, how one talks about pain and how metaphor operates within that, and kind of the intersections of medical humanities, media, photo history, art history, iconography. So in keeping with the pleasure thing, I'm going to show a short video that I made. This was something that I made for an installation when I was in my last semester of graduate school. And this is where the performance of, I guess my like alter ego kind of started. I was watching a lot of ER and Grey's Anatomy. So this is a short video of me practicing lines from Grey's Anatomy and ER to myself in the mirror. So I'll just play a piece of it, and I'm gonna do a test. And
2100.
Can y'all hear that?
Yeah, that's great, Rachel.
Awesome.
It's a beautiful day to save lives. Time of death, 2100. Come on, people, look alive. I need 12 units of oneg. Stat. Clear. Somebody page cardio. 10 blade. Don't worry, ma'am. We're gonna take really, really good care of you. I need some help in here. I need quiet in the room, please. Jesus Christ, there's a lot of blood here. Don't worry. We're gonna take really, really good care of you. Push 10 of epi. Listen, if you're not gonna take responsibility, I'm going to have to ask somebody else. I need some help in here. Can you do that? God damn it! Answer your pages. I need you to run it wide open. She's dying here. We're gonna have to do an MRI to check for internal bleeding. Ma'am, don't be scared. Can you do that? It's a beautiful day to save lives, people. It's a beautiful day to save lives, people. Hey guys, it's a beautiful day to save lives. I'm so happy we're all in this together. We're gonna help her. Damn it, we're gonna have to cut him open. Push 2 of Demerol. How bad is the nausea? You're doing good. Not much longer.
So that was playing on a CRT monitor, so it was like an old school box TV mounted up in a corner, and I've showed an installation view. I realize I don't have this in this slide, but I showed an installation view of it. I created a doctor's waiting room and an exam room, but like both of them were sort of off for my thesis show, so that was sort of playing on repeat. I'm sure the people who worked at the museum loved it, loved hearing me repeat that over and over. So this performance started happening, and it's kind of gotten further along where I've been riding the line between like faking it and playing doctor, which is something that I like saying because there are multiple significations of doctor, like doctoring footage, altering something, or playing doctor has sexual connotations that are explicitly associated with more like curiosity-based touching and seeing as a child. And the childlike and play things come up a lot in my work. So I'm going to continue from where I sort of ended off with the last talk, which is a recent project that I've started incorporating some of the material that's more clinical, more sourced archival images that I showed in the last talk, with more personal work that I got from, so this is a self-portrait that I made in my studio. Also, I think this was a few months ago. And I recently got access to, or I have, all of my grandmother's stuff. So my grandmother died 11 years ago. She was an artist, and oh, I forgot I can scroll forward in things too. She was, let's go over to here. So she was a painter who got her MFA when she was in her late 60s. And she was a really prolific painter who made work that was very much about gendered power dynamics and sexuality. And she was really like hardcore in her studio, and I grew up going to her studio with her and having her teach me how to paint and having her speak to me like I was an adult. And that was extremely formative for me. And then also watching her die a very slow and painful death was also really formative. So just for context, this is an image of one of her paintings. And this is like a large oil painting. And so I started going through all of this material that I have of hers. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going into the medical archives and working with, I was working with SUNY Upstate Medical University, University of Rochester Medical Center, because I was living in Syracuse, New York, and I was working a 9-to-5 job at Lightwork. And it was a really good way to have like a consistent practice where I make myself get up very early because the archives opened at 7:30, go in, make photographs of the objects there, start scanning negatives of these clinical photographs, and then get to work by 9. But then I also amassed just this huge collection of my grandmother's stuff, and included these notebooks. And if anybody's seen Grey's Anatomy, finding the eponymous Meredith Grey, a big theme or like storyline in Grey's is that Meredith Grey's mother was like a brilliant surgeon, but also a very, very difficult woman to deal with, and had some severe mental illness that created a traumatic environment for Meredith. But she finds a bunch of notebooks that her grandmother had. And there's been like a similar intergenerational passing down of mental illness, and that was kind of the main theme of this show that I had. So this is just an example of some of the ephemera that I have of hers. So these files, I have all of her medical records, all of these notebooks from studio visits, all of her like slides, her rejection letters or acceptance letters from like Saltonstall or Apollo Krasner grant, stuff like that. So I had this show, and this was where I sort of mixed together the images that I was making in archives, images I was making in my lab, and then objects that I had of Jackie, my grandmother's, and objects that I had gotten from the archives. So in this image, and this is where kind of the intersection of like intense pain and intense joy and fun has come up in my work a little bit more, where like she was the most intense person I've ever met, but she was also the most fun, and she had toys, and she was like wonderful at acknowledging the validity of joy and also the validity of like any form of pleasure. So not feeling shame of watching TV, even if it's quote unquote bad TV. So this she was framing things in these like blow up frames for a little bit, which I'm super in love with. And as I scroll through some of my detail or install shots, you'll see like the materials that I use vary widely. Sometimes it's dependent upon like its archival status, and sometimes I am just doing things based upon either like references or again, like materials. So a lot of the materials that were in the show were coated in resin, mounted on things that like this is a box of slides that have turtle's blood on them. While I was working with the archives at Upstate, the longer I was there, the more it seemed like they trusted me. And so they started giving me things that they couldn't keep in the archives. So they can't keep organic material in the archives. So they were like, hey, we have these slides of turtle's blood. Do you want them? Because we can't keep them. So I started incorporating things like that into the work. So I'm going to show more install shots of the show, but before that, I'm going to show a video that was playing in it and talk a little bit about that. So at the same time that I had this show, which is at a space that was opened up by two SFAI graduates in Buffalo, who one of them grew up there. I grew up in Buffalo as well. And then going back to the frontness and backness thing. So this is a detail shot from the show. In it, this is or was my like a smock from my grandma's studio, and I hung it with suture threads, and it sort of slowly like waved in the breeze. And this was another form of like analog animation, this kind of uncanny movement that was happening. So I also had a video playing in the show called, let's show a detail shot, called Referred Pain. So this, in the foreground, this is a little plant. Does anyone recognize what this plant is, actually? It's got kind of a cult following. I don't know if plants can have those. It's a resurrection plant. I got it, whoops. Let's see if I have a shot of that. I do. I got it on sale at Joann Fabrics for like $4. There's an image of the box in the drawers that the plant is sitting on. So I had this medicine cabinet that was sitting in the middle of the exhibition space, and it's filled with these objects, and you'll see them come up in the videos that I'm going to show. So it's a mixture of these like tiles that I've been making where the tiles have prints on them. And so the print on top here, this is a tin of sodium amytal, which I talked about in the first talk. I can test the waters here though. Does anyone here know what sodium amytal is? So it's a barbiturate. It's like a really early class of drug that was used as one of the first forms of truth serum. And so this image that I took of it is of this tin of sodium amytal that I found in the archives that I was working with. So a lot of the material that they have, I find it really fascinating, the choices that the archivist and or the donors make about like what they must keep preserved in the archive, and also what's like hidden within the institution. But I found this tin in a medic's first aid kit from 1942. So it was like a World War II medics first aid kit. And this tin, and they were all still intact, and I was alone photographing this tin of their colloquially called blue heavens. But so this intersection of like horror and beauty is something that comes up again and again. And so that's next to like a hospital sock from the last time I was in the hospital, and like a lot of these materials, like an old school proctoscope. And then these, in the second drawer, these are these impressions of pill bottles that I've been making. So I mixed like my pill bottles with my grandmother's pill bottles, and then I made reproductions of them that look like this. So I made these reproductions in plastic. And then on the bottom of the drawer of the medicine cabinet, there's like the little box for the resurrection plant. And a resurrection plant, the one that I have will outlive me for sure. It's something that can go without water for 100 years, and then it'll come back to life when you put it in water. So for the show, I reanimated this resurrection plant that was $4.95 at Joann Fabrics. So I think it's really interesting what is marketed as or functions as a toy, and kind of what is the line before like a tool becomes a toy and vice versa. So in the background, a video is playing that I'm going to show now. It's 6 minutes, and it's called Referred Pain. So in keeping with my grandmother's like intense interest in sexuality and performance, I had been making this video at the same time that I was working on the This Woman Has Issues show, as well as the same time that I was working on the Sex Lives of Animals Without Backbones show. And then I I had video work in the past, and I was offered the opportunity to show at the Everson Museum, but I hadn't made the video yet. But I was like, yeah, I'm working on something. So I made this video because I was also really enamored of, I was thinking about three-dimensionality again and spinning, and I had started making these images of exporting images from MRIs and CT scans that I had that are animated. So of like my spine turning, and this goes back to the like, how the fuck do I get access to my internal organs? And then I also had a friend who is a really wonderful pole dancer, and had been shooting video of them pole dancing, and it was like pleasure, like it was just like a very intuitive thing. But then I started lining that up with these 3D renderings, 3D animations, and then also I had been making these microscopy videos. Does anyone recognize what this creature is? Anyone like it maybe took a bio class in high school and saw them? So it's Daphnia magna. It's a microscopic like plankton creature. It's basically like a water flea. And they're used really often in like early science experiments for heart rate, showing heart rate, because they're transparent and it's really easy to see their heart, and they reproduce really, really quickly. You can order like a tin of 100 of them online for $7. So they're a really great microscopic pet to have. So I had started making these videos with them. And here's an image that's also in the show in Forecast of two of my pets, or actors, whatever you call them. So they show up in the video as well. So I'm going to show referred pane now. And this is 6 minutes and 16 seconds.
Are there like moth power dynamics?
What way?
I don't know. Like, my species or version is better than yours, so get out of here. Like competitions for food, or
Oh.
is that too big of a question?
Here. Yeah, no. When you. It's bad.
Oh, okay.
Don't let them drink that water.
No, yeah, I'm gonna.
a bloody knife. I threw her in the river, which was a dreadful sight. My father often told me that money would set me free if I would murder the girl that I love, whose name was Rose Connolly.
I'm sorry, I tried. I'm so sorry.
Should we clean this up?
Yeah, we need to put that bleach.
Okay, so so I'm going to show a couple more detail shots from the show and then launch right into a shorter video of a performance that we did in the space as well. And then I'm going to focus a little bit more on some of my images that I did show last time and then kind of connecting them to objects that I've also been showing. So I'm going to play it from here. Play from current. There we go. So in the show, I mixed images. So on the right side of this image is a microscopy print or a photograph I made through a microscope. And this is totally like another part of that weird DIY scientist thing where like the footage of the fly eyeball in the video, I found a fly on the floor when I was at a residency. And I was like, I wonder if I could see it through this microscope that I borrowed from a med student when I was in Syracuse, and then he like disappeared. So I was like, oh, now I have a nice microscope. And I got an attachment so I could make photos and videos with it. So it's a print that I then scrunched up and coated in resin, and destroying or degrading or like watching images fall apart and allowing that to be a natural process and kind of fighting preservation and degradation comes into the work a lot. So there's this print next to pain pill bottle, and inside of the bottle is it's also resin, and anytime I find anything dead, I usually float it in resin and use it for the work. So inside of this, there was a moth wing. I have a photograph of how that looks in an older installation. And it'll come up later. But so I have these kind of imprints, and that's next to this resin bottle with bait worms in it over here. Oh, there it is. Oh my God. Haha. So this is from my thesis show. And so this was also like when I first started doing that. So it's a deceased spider floating in resin in this pill bottle that was sitting on top of this recovered exam table that I had. And then this is another detail shot from the installation. So on the left-hand side, you can kind of see in a similar manner to some of the images that are in the forecast show on the site right now, I printed more images on ceramic tiles that are grouted, and then leaning up on these boards, and the boards are coated in resin. And so I really, again, kind of going back to that hard science, hard object, soft object play. I really work with that a lot. And then having prints on wallpaper and mixing my source material. So if we get to it, a newer video that I have these time lapses and animations that I've been making from either actual time lapse imagery or making the same image with like slight variation over and over. So these two images of brains are from a stereoscopic atlas of anatomy that's at Visual Studies Workshop. So I made reproductions of those while I was in residence there. And stereoscopic imagery is a theme that comes up in the work quite a bit. So going back to an image that I spoke a bit about last time, this is a photograph from 1927. And it's a clinical photograph from University of Rochester Medical Center's archives. And the distance between what is being photographed and what the doctors were attempting to photograph, or what the doctors who hired the hospital photographer, who doesn't exist, that job doesn't exist anymore. If anybody has had surgery recently, or I had surgery recently, and they had to take a before and after photo, and it was literally just like a back room with my doctor and a shitty digital camera and these like old hot lights. And so looking at old images, this image is frighteningly similar to the surrealist, an image from a well-known surrealist film on Chan Andalou from 1929. And so I had this image that is scanned, and then I kind of pair it with images that I've been making. So this is one of my early, like one of the first things that I was doing when I started this work, ordering biological materials from biological supply companies online. So this is a cow eyeball, which is what was actually in the next scene for the Buñuel Dali film. And there's kind of an intense relationship between this photograph, which, so for the prints at University of Rochester Medical Center, these were slightly different from Upstate. These were actual physical prints and not negatives. And the prints on the back of them, the diagnosis was written. So on the back of this, the diagnosis was manic depressive. And so there is such an incredible, like the intensity of this image exists in the subtext or the text outside of it. And it's kind of populated with more meaningful information and intensity and viscerality with that additional context outside of the image itself. So that visceral relationship with sight too, and like seeing something and the relationship between seeing and knowing comes up again and again in my work. So this is a detail shot from an installation that I did at a project space in Syracuse, New York. So I dissected a cow eyeball and I dissected a lemon the same way and showed them kind of opposite each other. And then I also had prints that were photographs. So I had this photograph printed and I had a photograph of the lemon itself printed, but they were like opposite. So this was kind of the beginning of the material play that I was doing. But that goes back to this exploration of binocular disparity that is such an important aspect of the work that I've been doing. So I'm going to show a short video of the installation or of the performance that I had Evan, who is the pole dancer in the video. So he choreographed a performance. So we set up a pole in the gallery space, and he choreographed a performance that was in response to a recording of a doctor practicing hypnosis on a patient from 1973. So a lot of the materials that I've been working with are from a collection that was donated from the trust of a someone who was a neurologist at SUNY Upstate Medical University, Dr. Arthur Ecker. So I had this audio recording, and that was another part of this kind of meditative practice that was like, I just go here and look at more things. So I was transferring these tapes to digital and just listening to these hypnosis tapes. So this is 2 minutes. And so there are two projectors on Evan, who is the pole dancer. One is microscopy footage that I had shot of bait worms, and the bait worms were in the show in that little bottle. And then it was also footage of the dried turtle's blood. So everything that is in the microscopy footage was also physically in the space. And then I also had this overhead projector, and I was kind of switching out transparencies from, there was like a retired high school biology teacher in Syracuse who was like, I'm gonna get rid of these biotransparencies, and continuing this performance of like, am I a doctor? Am I a high school science teacher? Like, what the fuck am I? So to this dance that he did, I also was switching out the diagrams on the overhead projector. So I'll just play this. The full performance was around 13 minutes. So this is like a 2-minute clip of it.
Drowsy, peaceful, relaxing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Deeper with each number. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Peaceful and comfortable. Now think of coming up to a totally alert and awake state, not waiting to drop the pencil. The first few times you do this, you won't drop the pencil. If we had numbers representing depth, the pencil dropping would be at a level of about 10 in relation to 0, which would be wide awake. You might get to 5 or 6 the first time. As I count now from 10 down, think of coming up totally alert and awake. You might notice a little numbness of your right arm, as though you've been lying on it, but you probably won't the first time or two you do this. This is a practice, this is an exercise, and your skill improves as you repeat. Coming up now, but keeping your eyes closed till I get to 0. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So here in 2 steps are the means that I use of showing people about muscles, about communication, about their ability to alter sensory awareness for painful stimuli. Thanks for listening.
There we go. I was just clicking it a bunch. So yeah, that was a performance that happened, and it was totally like, it was on the same night. So I have so much trouble like figuring out what to call what I am even doing or what this event was. So he did that performance, and that was after an author who I really love and I'm really intimidated by, who is the chair of the English department at University at Buffalo, which is a SUNY school. She wrote a book called Victorian Pain. Rachel gave a talk about pain in relationship to my work. I don't know, like I had just mentioned her, and then Emily, who is one of the people who runs the Buffalo Institute for Contemporary Art that they just opened, reached out to her, and she was like, yeah, I would love to give a talk. So she gave this talk that was very wonderful. And then we were like, and now a pole dance performance to hypnosis. And I really liked that. And I was thinking quite a bit about my grandmother again, and like her voracious intensity with like, how do we make work about the world? How does art function in the world? How should it function? And she collected a lot of images, and a lot of them had to do with performances. She painted a lot of like scantily clad femme figures. And so I'm gonna get back in and show a couple more things. How are we on time? Good. So I'll show a few more things, and then I do have a little preview of one of the newest things that I'm working on.
Hey, Rachel, just to give you an accurate check, it's 7:05. It's about
Okay.
7:07. So however much time you want to leave for questions or comments, but you have about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. I will then, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna show an artist book I made, and then I'll show, it's sort of a trailer for the video that I'm working on. I think that'll be cool. And then I'm just gonna speed through some slides too, so you'll get like a speed thing.
You don't don't feel rushed though. We've got plenty of time. I hope you don't feel rushed.
Oh, no, totally. I always have too many slides, so it's kind of fun to go like through them. I included a lot of, so this is an image that I did talk about in an event that we had with Brittany Kathy Adams and Jacqueline Wright a few weeks ago. But just for context for a video that I'm working on that I will be showing the preview for. Going back to that like push and pull between photography and sculpture or physical objects, I have been 3D printing. So the 3D animations that you saw in the video, I've started exporting files and 3D printing them. So this is my cervical spine. And then I am making impressions of them, then molding them in, I tried wax, it didn't melt fast enough, so coconut oil, and embedding materials in them, and then making time-lapse videos of them melting. And as they melt, the materials appear, and it's usually been toys, or, and the toys have been like little mini organs. A friend of mine for my birthday sent me a toy anatomy set, and I was like, oh, this is my dream. So this also includes, let's go back. So I wanted to include some more just like references of stuff I'm looking at and thinking about. I am working on a podcast about Grey's Anatomy. I bring this up a lot, but I think popular representations of and understandings of science, that is just like something that I am fascinated by, and not even just science, but anything morbid. So I just started watching Law and Order SVU. Any SVU people here? I had never watched any of it, and now I'm just like, why am I so attracted to and disgusted by this feeling? And similarly for horror movies. So yes, hey. So this is just a text. So the podcast we're releasing shortly, it's called Gray's Analogy, but it's kind of in keeping with this text, Adventures in Shondaland. This is just a really good collection of medical humanities analysis of Shonda Rhimes' extended universe. And I really like looking at things like that, but then also kind of going back to really classic, or not even just classic, but something that a text that established a genre. So Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's mode of making Frankenstein is how I started thinking about this work. The way she was making work is through sublimation. So she sublimated herself as this decidedly male Dr. Frankenstein to explore these really complex notions about what it means to have a body, what it means to be a human being. And that speculative fiction and form of making work that is not diaristic, it's sublimation. I think that's like a really big thing that I take as influence. And then another thing that I have been thinking about is first-person illness narratives. So in keeping with subjectivity, and scientific objectivity is a term that is tossed around often. And someone who is also like a very well-known medical humanities writer, Sandra Harding, and this is more like 70s writing stuff. She introduced an idea called strong objectivity, which is an objectivity that is not, doesn't pretend neutrality, but it vehemently acknowledges its positionality perpetually. And I think about that a lot in terms of like what I've been looking for when I go into these very hard science spaces. And then just like the things that I'm reading, a lot of auto theory, so like autobiographical and theoretical things combined. If you haven't read the Cancer Journals, which is a collection of writings made up of like journal entries that Audre Lorde wrote around, it was after her first mastectomy. Super beautiful, and kind of like such an incredible argument for the validity of subjective experiences, especially of subjective bodily experiences. And she wrote sort of in critique of the what she called like pink ribbon activism, where it's trying to normalize illness in a way that actually just like crushes it, where like she was expected to wear like be fitted for a prosthesis because after her first mastectomy she only had one breast, and she didn't. And whenever she went into her doctor would be like, oh, why aren't you wearing the prosthesis? And she was just like, I don't want to and don't feel the need to. And there was like visible discomfort from the medical professionals around her for making that choice. And this is another connection to an influence that I talked about in part 1 with Barbara Hammer and her last performance lecture, The Art of Dying, Palliative Art Making in the Age of Anxiety. And then kind of pushing forward, so Roland Barthes is another one who's like, of course, quite a canonized photo writer, and not just photo, canonized media theory. Someone who is really influential for me, particularly like as a queer person. But more recently, last year, I think, there was a collection of unpublished letters that were published of his. And I did not realize the extent of illness he was his entire life. Like he had tuberculosis and was in and out of sanatoriums. And most of the material that he wrote, especially Camera Lucida, which was written shortly after the death of his mother, was also written from a sanatorium where he like wrote about like, I woke up at blah, blah, blah for the cure, which is like whatever treatment that they were getting. So this is an image I made of an apparatus called, it's a Cutler Robinson apparatus. I forget what it's called, but it is something that it's not used anymore, but it was used in those sanatoriums for treatment of tuberculosis patients. It was actually these two like jars that are used to induce a pneumothorax. So it's effectively to like suck the air out of one's lung, like one of their lungs, to give it rest. And it's also just like the most elegant, beautiful thing. So this is a photograph that I made of it. And then behind this are a mixture of images that I made of these like tableaus and these illustrations from medical texts from the turn of the century that I've been scanning. And then the last couple references I'll do, and then I'll show the video, which is 6 minutes. Has anyone read The Undying by Anne Boyer? That came out, it came out last year. This shit, it is so incredible. So this is another auto theory thing. So first person experience of having, I forget what stage, but she has cancer. And she also is kind of continuing continuing in like the footsteps of Audre Lorde, and she references a lot of, she references texts by her and also like more historical narratives of illness. And it's just like such a wonderful, searing critique of the US healthcare system, which we are all watching play out, like the tragedy, the ridiculous disparity that is occurring in treatment. And also like she speaks about how much it's connected to language too, language in capital. And I think that is something that I think about often in the work. And so visual language is like where I feel like I'm coming at it from. Yeah, last 3 references. This is just something I just highlighted, something that I really liked. So this is another text that I've been reading. This was, so this is just an essay that's in The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams. And it's really interesting because vegetarianism, I like forgot that that was a big thing between Mary Shelley and Percy Bysshe Shelley. But this text is really brilliant because it's a really great analysis or reflection of Frankenstein's monster as a vegetarian creature, and like analyzing that from a social standpoint. But as I'm coming up with ideas for the work, I'm sort of continuously gathering either visual material or just little pieces of concepts. So thinking about deconstructing words, so like remembering rather than dismembering, and that calls attention to the relationship between dismember and remember and how much that is like associated with creation and destruction, how much memory is associated with creation or fabrication. And then the last 2 things I'll show, this is something I was doing this semester. My students, I make my students make, usually, so I've been teaching more like interdisciplinary classes, and I make my students, especially my freshmen, make horror films, especially if I'm teaching in the fall. So spent a lot of time watching like 70s and 80s horror films. I don't know if anyone's seen Scalpel. It was directed by John Grissmer in 1977. This also, like, connecting to some aesthetic just mind fucks. This film, there are a lot of like B movies that, or B like horror that actually like touches on some, I almost like glossed over concepts, and this touches all the way back to like the speculative fiction and that collection by Adrienne Marie Brown, where like so much fantasy, sci-fi, speculative fiction is such like, it's a source of information, and it's actually like vital social information. So this is a very, very, very strange film. It's easily findable. And this is not like, I watched it recently, and I also, the last reference I'll do, has anyone seen Vamp? Oh fuck, I hadn't either, because it's so like innocuous, like nobody, it's from 1986, I think, but like Grace Jones is in it, and not just, Grace Jones isn't just in it, she is like, the way she's introduced is she's painted, like there's this beautiful paint job that, oh, fuck, now that I'm talking in front of people, I'm forgetting his name, but everybody knows this painter, amazing queer painter. I'll remember it at some point when I am not speaking in front of people.
I'm
But
sorry, you mean Keith Haring, right?
Keith Haring, thank you so much.
You know that. I'm sorry. I'm listening as you go along. I was on mute, but yeah, that's Keith Haring.
Pals, yes.
There you go.
Dude, I had no idea. Like I was, so this is like a very easy storyline. I didn't do Scalpel because it's a way too complex of a storyline. But the storyline of Vamp, so it's like a B, I don't even know who fucking directed it. Because it doesn't matter. I feel like the only thing that matters is that the storyline is that there are these two frat boys who go into the city because they want to find a stripper so that they can get into like a frat party. And then they go into the strip club, and unbeknownst to them, it's run by Grace Jones, who's actually a vampire who feeds on the flesh of stupid frat boys. And she's introduced in this incredible performance where she's painted head to toe by Keith Haring, and she's dancing on this chair that's made, like it's an impression of a figure who was her partner at the time. And it was just like, how does this exist? And so those are kind of the things that I'm looking at that influence how I make work, or just like, and this almost answers the question that was asked in the last talk about like my usage of color and my aesthetic. Very much like 70s, 80s horror. It's really all about like the things I'm watching and what I'm influenced by. So the last thing is Psychodiagnostic, which is a small artist book that just, I made like a small run of it. So there's 25 copies that I made. So Psychodiagnostic, this is another thing, like if I'm feeling restless or like I just like make smaller things while I'm in the middle of working on these longer like film, video, whatever projects. So Psychodiagnostic is an artist book that is based off of the original Psychodiagnostic, which is, if anyone knows the Rorschach tests, Herman Rorschach published a book that was like an artist book when he also published the psychoanalytic writings and like case studies about his usage of this test. And the original Psychodiagnostic has 10 unique plates that were like the ones that you were supposed to use for the Rorschach test. So using spinal cross sections that I found in a medical archive, since I started teaching at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, we have a risograph, and I had never printed on one, and I found out that we have gold ink. So I was like, oh, this will be perfect to make ink blots. So I used spinal cross sections to make a series of 10 ink blots and make this small book, and then it's sewn together with suture thread. So this is just like a smaller thing that I had been working on. It's for sale at Visual Studies Workshop. So this is just like, has become part of the work too. So I'm sure this will end up also in an installation as a pseudo artifact. So with that, what time is it? Oh, yeah, let's talk about stuff. Fuck it. I'll stop sharing. Does anyone have thoughts or questions? Feelings? Oh, someone wrote a thing.
I had a question. The earlier video you showed was called Referred Pain.
Yes.
And I wanted to know sort of like what your thoughts on that title were for Referred Pain.
That's a beautiful question. And actually, it's kind of a fraught answer. I mean, I did that as a reference to the psychosomatic phenomena, or not psychosomatic necessarily, but the phenomena where like sometimes referred pain is you feel pain in one area, but it's referred from something else. So that's like a more complex.
I'm experiencing it right this second, actually.
Really?
Really, I have a pain in my arm, and for a long time I thought, oh, I've pulled a muscle, or I've done something weird, and then I realized in talking to my doctor, and you already know probably what it was. It was in my neck, and other
Yeah.
people with sciatica and things in their legs. When you first experience it, it really feels like a cramp, but the problem is up here, and that's interesting. It was painful, and I had to do physical therapy for a while. But it's interesting in that it made me, much like your work does, more aware of my internal systems. Because it kind of made sense that a pinch up here hurts down here. Kind of like when you see how it works and when you look at the anatomy and then see where the nerve branch, you're like, oh, right. And that was interesting and humbling all at the same time. Anyway, that I thought about that as you were showing the video.
Definitely. And that's like, this is another like tirade that I could go on, but it's bullshit that anatomy isn't core curriculum for like middle schoolers. Like, how is it that the only anatomy that I remember being taught, the only like visualization of my internal organs were in like health class, which was code for how to poorly teach kids about sex. And the only anatomy that I had seen represented was like a very sexed anatomy where I was like, I know what my ovaries look like. That's it. Like, I know where they are.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like only in a
weird.
flat.
What is that?
Exactly. But so for the referred pain title though, this was, I don't want to drag the curator, he's brilliant, but so I had this video in a show and I read the wall text, and the wall text hadn't been sent to me before the show. And so in the wall text, the curator said, referred pain is like references when doctors refer patients to another doctor. And I was like, no. But that is just an example of like, I'm sure that happens all the time. And it's medical stuff is perplexing. Does that answer that?
Yes.
I'm reading in the chat and elsewhere. I think a lot of us have experience with referred pain. Senny was making a comment about that.
Yes.
I see a question from Jacob. Jacob, would you like to? Let's see. We're getting close to 7:30, but I think we have time for one question. Jacob, would you like to ask it directly?
Jacob, Hi, Jacob.
Nice. Oh, you're already like my favorite person.
I know, Jacob. How's it going?
You're still on mute, though, my friend.
I'm great. Sorry about the mute. How are you, Rachel?
Great.
Good. This was awesome. I'm really curious how some of the performance might have stuck with you. Do you find yourself like referencing a doctor's side of you or like slipping into that at all?
All the time. And in like, so yeah, do EMTs, ambulances hold any interest to you? Absolutely. That is my, it's, if I don't stay in academia, which I plan to, but I also, it hurts, it's hard. I know everybody I'm talking to is probably experienced some of this, but I definitely would be an EMT. That's like absolutely what I would do. And I also, yeah, so I think about it often. I've learned a lot of medical stuff. So like, I'm very well versed in it now. Like I can give someone stitches. I know how to like stitch a wound closed, things like that. And I also, in like a psychoanalytic standpoint, this, hopefully none of my students are here, one of my favorite things to do is to diagnose someone based on their work. So I'll see someone's work. And this happened in a class recently where a student was showing work and I was like, this reminds me of, do you know I asked the class, like, do you know the psychological experience of depersonalization or derealization? Nobody in the class knew it except for the student. And he was like, yeah, I experienced that. That's a big issue for me. And I was like, it's in your work. So totally, yeah, I don't know where the performance starts and ends.
Cool. I feel like with how in your work you are and like in depth in your practice, like I don't know if there is a start or stop. And I really like knowing that you can like give stitches now and also psychoanalyze someone. And within the realms of art, I'm like kind of conceptualizing your work as like emotional stitching for people almost, and for yourself, like especially with some of like your relating with your grandma and that piece you had floating in that, I was like, my heart just started pounding.
Totally.
So yeah, I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I love the phrase emotional stitching. That was awesome.
Cool.
What else? Oh, I should 3D print more parts of my body. That's exactly what I'm trying to do right now. I'm getting a brain scan next week, so maybe we'll see if I can get this brain printed.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Well, keep us posted of your work. It's amazing to see such a breadth of creative output. It doesn't surprise me that you're kind of interested and would be an EMT. I was thinking about this the first time you shared the cow eyeball with us. I'm like, yep, I appreciate there are people who can cut open bodies and eyeballs and like fix my neck. Like that's great. It's not me.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't think
Totally.
it's interesting. I don't think I would be, I would turn away from someone in need. I feel like I could provide basic help, like that kind of stuff. But my curiosity only goes so far. And one of the takeaways I've had from your work as you share your relationship with you and your history, your work, your relationship with your own body, your relationship with the medical establishment, you have a frankness and confidence and sort of ownership of your body and bodies that I find admirable. I get afraid of my own. I have a bit of a hypochondriac, right? If we're going to diagnose things, those are things that make me anxious. I just as soon not know. So sometimes it's interesting to understand how my nerves work because I'm like, oh, right, my nerve is pinched. Now I know that, and I don't think I'm having a stroke or a heart attack for some, right? Like it's so weird.
Yes.
I have an anxious response, and in your work, I see just the fundamental opposite of that, and that part of it, I think is inspiring, and I think has come through. You know, at your last conversation, you made a huge impression on a doctor who happened to be in the audience, and you're tapping into something that I think is exciting. So with that, we are just we can go over a little bit. We're a little past 7:30, but I just want to thank this group, this intimate group for being here. We were joking before we started today. You know, we didn't mean to have two small conversations, but I said, you know, Rachel, I bet if given the option, you'd almost prefer two small groups as opposed to like a great thing. So I'm glad that it worked out, and we'll put both of these together on our event page. Thank you so much for sharing your work, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you, Christina, as usual, for helping to produce all of this. And I hope, as Adam just wrote in the chat, you all have a wonderful holiday, and I hope we are in for a much better 2021. I think actually this is our last online event until we get to 2021. We have We have Rania Montar coming up on the 13th of January. Am I right, Christina? Yeah. So the 13th of January is our next our next online event. I could say this to a lot of people, but I thank all of you. I see a lot of names that have been involved with us over the last year. So thanks to all of you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
We'll see
Thanks
you all
everyone for
soon.
coming.
This was lovely.
Yeah.
Take care and good night.